separate and apart from the particular circumstances of Ferguson, which I am careful not to speak to because it's not my job as president to comment on ongoing investigations and specific cases, but the frustrations people have generally, those are rooted in some hard truths that have to be addressed.
The fact there is a racial divide between black and white in America is hardly news. But in recent years, for a myriad of reasons, things are only getting worse. And what's happening in Ferguson, Missouri should give those on all sides of the argument pause to reconsider their situation and how they intend to go forward and heal the rift. And that does begin in Missouri. We need to spend some time today to decide exactly what has happened, what is going on, and why then we are still where we are at today. It is a question now as to what happens after Ferguson. There are people on the ground, but there are also protesters all around the country. These are the protesters right now that are deciding that they need to be heard. If you listen and if you look around different cities, in New York, they are stopping traffic. In Los Angeles, they are doing the same. Certainly there are protests in Miami. There are protests in every facet of every city in America at this moment. But we now need to deal with a lot of the facts, and that comes down to what comes out of the grand jury. Also, we're hearing a lot about what the officer himself said. You saw earlier just a short clip of what Darren Wilson says happened. He claims that he does not have any remorse for what he did. He feels remorse certainly for the fact that someone died and that certainly a life had to be taken. But now it comes down a lot to what is happening with law enforcement and how they will deal with it from this point out as well. Let us now, I am told that we were just about ready to welcome in our guest, but our guest is not there. So we are going to continue to just bring you up to speed on a couple of the different things that are happening here. What we have here is 62% of African Americans in a Huffington Post YouGov poll of 1,000 adults released this week. They believe that Officer Darren Wilson was at fault in the shooting of Mike Brown. Only 22% of whites took that position. In 1992, a Washington Post ABC News poll found that 92% of blacks and 64% of whites disagreed with the acquittal of Los Angeles police officers involved in the videotaped beating of a black man. You'll recall, of course, that was the Rodney King case. So here we are now, leaving ourselves with a lot of numbers and a lot of discussion as to what happens next. Let us welcome into MidPoint now. He is the former police commissioner of the city of New York. Bernard Kerik joins us. Bernie, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Let me ask you then, from what you have heard from the officer himself, Darren Wilson, are you completely convinced that the officer did exactly what he needed to do, exactly as his training told him to do, and what was within the letter of the law?
Based on what I've seen and based on what I've heard, based on the things that I've read in the grand jury report, I believe that he was in fear of his life. I believe that he used the force necessary to effect an arrest or stop the circumstance. And I think he was justified in what he did.
What about those who say that there was a rush here and that perhaps even that the prosecutor on the scene should have gone to a special prosecutor and should have brought someone else in to ask the questions? Do you find anything wrong whatsoever in your experience with prosecutors themselves, how this was done, how this was conducted?
You know what? I've been involved in shootings. I was involved in a shooting where my partner was actually shot, and I shot the guy that shot him. I had to testify before a grand jury, and I testified with prosecutors that prosecuted cases with me in the past. There was nothing wrong with it at the time. I don't see any problem with the process unless there's some reason to believe that there's some bias on the prosecutor's part. You know, and a lot of times that's seen by the Attorney General of the state. It's seen by the governor's office, perhaps. In this case, I don't see anything wrong with what the process as it took place.
All right, now, Bernie, I'm going to ask you to stand by for a couple of minutes here because we have a lot to talk about with regard to Darren Wilson, with regard to his testimony, and certainly more digging into the grand jury and what is happening in Ferguson. Please stand by a moment. We'll be back with Bernie Kerik on the other side of a short break. There are indeed questions about a police officer. Darren Wilson admitted that he felt fear. And there are many people believing that as a police officer, you should not feel fear at any time. We'll also talk about the relationship between a prosecutor and the cops himself. In Telling It Like It Is, we hit it 51 minutes after the hour with a very special thanks after a very difficult week. One man in Ferguson, Missouri believes that there is reason to have hope and to give thanks. But at the same time, he needs to ask for help from America. That and so much more coming up right here on MidPoint, where we question everything.
And as I look back at him, all of a sudden, punches start flying.
He threw the first punch?
Yes. He threw the first one and hit me in the left side of my face.
Because, you know, some of the witnesses have said that they saw you trying to pull him into the car.
That would be against every training ever taught to any law enforcement officer.
And then what?
I had reached out my window with my right hand to grab onto his forearm because I was going to try and move him back and get out of the car to where I'm no longer trapped. And when I felt it, I just felt the immense power that he had. I mean, the way I've described it is it was like a 5-year-old holding on to Hulk Hogan. That's just how big this man was.
Hulk Hogan?
He was very large.
Let's welcome back to MidPoint. Former New York City Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik joins us. Bernie, let's talk about the police officer Darren Wilson and the word fear that is being used, because he says he feared for his life. There are people right now saying that as a police officer, it's not his job to feel fear. His training should kick in, and that fear might have been part of the reason that he overreacted. How do you react to those people with those sorts of claims?
That's absurd. Okay. If you're a human being, you have fear. You have to know how to deal with it and how to handle it, but you will have fear. There are things you will be afraid of, and cops are not supermen. They're not made of steel, and they can be overpowered. In 1987, I lost a very good friend that I was in the police academy with. Somebody overpowered him and took his gun and killed him with his own gun. It happens. And every cop that wears a shield and carries a gun, or every federal agent or every state trooper, they understand that. They know that. The worst thing that can happen to you is in a physical confrontation, you could be overcome by somebody that's more powerful than you. That person takes your gun and kills you with it. So I get it. I understand it. I know what he was going through, and I understand why he did what he did.
What about those, and again, we're dealing with an awful lot of people here who are very critical of what has gone on here. And I know that as somebody who's been in these situations before, you can speak exactly to this. The thinking process that he continued to fire, that there was a continuation, that there were more than 10 shots fired. Why not just fire one? Why not just fire a warning shot? I know you've heard all this before, but is it not fair to say that when you are in that moment, there still has to be a time when you have to protect yourself, you have to protect the citizenry around you, and you have no idea what or whom you are facing?
You shoot to stop. That's what you shoot for. You don't shoot to kill. You don't fire warning shots. The only time you use your weapon, that you actually use it, is when you are in fear of your life or for the life of someone else. That's when you use your gun, and you use that weapon strictly to stop. You're trained to fire center body mass. If the bullets hit somewhere else, that's because you were off aim. The bottom line is you try to stop that person. In this circumstance, I would imagine, and I haven't talked to the officer personally, I can only imagine that he fired until he stopped the threat. When that threat was stopped, he stopped firing.
Bernie, a couple minutes we have left here. How insulting is it to you as a law enforcement official, someone who spent your life there, that in the entire discussion about this, we rarely hear anything about the fact that Michael Brown had committed a crime, had allegedly stolen from a store, had allegedly strong-armed the clerk there, and had then put his body into the car while the officer was in the car? Does it not speak to you that if he indeed had not broken the law in a couple of different places or done these things, he would still be alive today?
Well, I believe that, and it's annoying that people defend that conduct and behavior. He committed a strong-arm robbery. He assaulted a cop. He attempted to take his gun, from what I understand, and then even after being fired at and shot, he returned back and charged the officer again. Okay, that is not a innocent child. All right, that is not an innocent child. Just like these people, you know, I've heard all these reports over the last few days. The protesters in Ferguson. No, these aren't protesters. These are rioters. These are people engaged in criminal, violent behavior. They're arsonists. They're committing grand larceny, burglary, arson, firing guns. This is criminal behavior. This is violent criminal behavior. And we have people that's defending that behavior, that conduct. This is bizarre. We live in a country where we are supposed to enforce the law, get these people off the streets.
And we're going to have to end it there, unfortunately, because of time, but we have so much more, and I know we're going to be talking about this for many, many more months down the road. Bernie, thanks so much for your time. We do appreciate it, as always, and to you and your family, have a very happy and a safe Thanksgiving weekend.
Same to you guys. Thank you.
All right, break, and we're back with the deadly facts about more than one auto manufacturer hiding the truth about products that could kill the consumer. And at 43 minutes after the hour, the single most important thing most people need to know about the Thanksgiving holiday, and it has absolutely nothing to do with food. Well, sort of, but not really. Stick around. MidPoint will continue.